what's up, man? How's it going?
Hey, good, good, good. A pleasure to meet you and to be able to have you on our program.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Scribe, I'm super excited to have this conversation with you and survey your work because it's a real treat when you come across a unique talent and somebody as just out the box, let's just say. I think your work is really out the box in terms of how you are using your illustration skills rather to combine with your letter styles. But Scribe, before I begin, I want to just read something about you to folks, give them some context, some background on you while I just kind of set up the monitor for us. Donald Scribe Ross is a celebrated artist, well known for his animated murals throughout different parts of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Beginning his creative journey as a kid in Boston, he would move on to Kansas City, where he spent approximately 18 years as the art director at Children's Mercy Hospital, where he did everything from graphic design, murals, throughout 4 locations in a metro, and managing a large-scale installation of a terrazzo flooring project. That sounds pretty exciting. And his most visible project was airbrushing the hospital-owned Life Flight helicopter. Scribe's works were inspired by his childhood love for cartoon characters, which developed a very unique and particular self-referential trait, which he inserts in various scenarios. Apart from these types of work, he shows in galleries and has published a children's book by the title "There's an Octopus Under My Bed," which I'm happy to say has been sold out at Barnes and Nobles and stores across the country. He also has had several figures released and sold, which sold out based on his signature character Rumpus and the rhino Sumego. Ross has done readings and small workshops with kids in bookstores across the country to discuss the process of his illustrations, murals, and story methods, while also doing live painting demonstrations. He has also spoken in many high schools, libraries, and youth centers around the Kansas City metro area, and in Cincinnati, Ohio, Chicago, and Illinois. And Scribe is married to Alyssa Ross, a graduate from Kansas City Art Institute, who has a BFA in fiber design. Alyssa focused on looming and weaving and silk dyeing using graffiti lettering as a form of inspiration, and later transitioned into combining these two when she started to create more 3D work and soft sculpture. Wow. Well, you on your own are quite a talent. Add your wife into the mix. You guys are the Bonnie and Clyde of the art world right now.
I was really lucky I found the right one. It's been 27 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So as we begin this talk, I generally like to kind of start out with everybody where were your humble beginnings? You had mentioned Boston. I was under the impression you're originally from Kansas City. Tell me about coming up in Boston in the 90s and the graffiti scene you were witnessing there.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to live around the world. So I lived overseas, Israel, London, lived in California for a while, and then made my way to Boston with my family for high school. And my mom was really supportive of my career, was trying to find me some avenues, and put me in an animation class at the Museum of Fine Arts there in Boston. And that's where I was already interested in graffiti, and I was seeing it on the subways. I lived in the South End of Boston for a while, and so I had seen murals by some people, Click, Wombat, and some others, people from BSB crew. But the first writer that I ever met was a guy named Bandit. And up there in that upper left-hand corner, that's actually an old page that he gave me when we were in animation class together. And it was really through him when he showed me, my first copies of spray can art and subway art, and started like kind of really hipping me to a lot of the history and how it went farther back, way farther back than Boston and into New York. And that was really where I was kind of like baptized into it. And then the stuff that I saw as I was taking the subways around Boston started to make more sense to me. And so I had a really supportive art teacher. I went to school on Newbury Street in the middle of downtown. My first 2 periods of the day were art. She was supportive in letting me wander the city. But I found myself either doing drawings or like jumping on the subway and going down stops and jumping fences to take photos of other people's graffiti, like people like Alert and Rise and Big and Target.
And in those days, what was your primary focus? Was it letter forms, or was it illustration?
I went to the animation class to, because I was interested in illustration. And even though I was keenly aware of lettering, I was still focused mainly on characters. But I think it was meeting Bandit that got me to try letters a little bit more. But I just, most of the time, if I went out and did it, I always felt compelled to combine the two of them. So when I was in Boston, I would, it was mostly sticker tags and stuff. And then that graduated to writing on things on the way home. I would work at a Chuck E. Cheese at night and find buildings on my way home and would try out different things, but had not really graduated to the point where people were really showing me like the difference between caps and how some of it worked. So I was really struggling with that part of it. Bandit lived on a different part of the city, was kind of hard to get a hold of. At that time it was just barely beepers and stuff like that. So it was hard for us to hook up. And so it wasn't really until I moved to Kansas City and I was going to the Art Institute that I met an artist named Gear, Gear, and a well-known artist named East from Chicago. And they were really the first ones that I guess took me on what you call missions.
One of the things you mentioned to me was the influence of the character as the letter form. You mentioned Twist, right? When you saw Twist's work and how his characters served as, I guess, the letter or the brand, let's just say, of his style. Was that something you was starting to pick up once you went to Kansas City and said, hey, let me just start considering this?
I think that I guess to clarify that a little bit more, that like what really spoke to me was when I saw his work, even though he is exceptionally skilled at his hand styles and lettering, of course, and always had that as a major focus. When he would just go out and do things like the screws and some of the faces and stuff like that, that really kind of ended up encouraging me to be okay with mainly focusing on lettering. I don't know if that was what his intention was when he was doing the work, but there was something that spoke to me that like you could be recognized solely for doing that thing. And by this point, we're talking about 1993 and I'm in Kansas City. And I was around some people that were so gifted at lettering and I was already comfortable with doing characters that I just started, I guess, doing the characters next to them in productions and stuff because I already felt like I was so behind the curve that I felt like I had to like make up some ground by doing something that was already that I already had instinct for.
Right. And then again, part of that, which was interesting, is that writers like Tyke and Reese, and those guys mentioned, they were turning their letters at times. They were character forms.
Yeah, I had a friend that started Scribble magazine. My friend Jason, who wrote Jacer and later Rapes,
Right.
rest in peace. He was really good about sharing photos, and when he was doing Scribble magazine, he had so many people sending stuff in, and was really connected to different parts of New York, and so was East actually. And so they exposed me to things like you had mentioned when I saw some old Reese lettering that had these like, you know, strange character forms and stuff coming off of the letters. And then like Tyke from AWR was like really organic and, you know, and kind of grimy and stuff. And so there were times where I would try to figure out how to do that stuff, but I was still moving kind of slow. I just kept going back to my normal thing of doing the characters next to my crewmates.
Right. And that crew was AT&T at that point.
Yeah, so he started a crew.
Abstract.
Yeah, it's called Abstracting the Typography. And, you know, ironically, I didn't do a whole lot of lettering and stuff at that time, but he was nice enough to put me in the crew and stuff. So I think I was a pretty good cheerleader next to them occasionally. And so I, you know, and then later on, I also was put into a crew called DF that some really close friends of mine named Emit and Sub, originally out of the like Connecticut area, who used to go up to New York a lot. Emit was now living in Denver, and he put me in DF crew. So ATT and DF were probably the two main crews that I've pushed ever since.
One of the things that's consistent in your work is your attraction to animals and illustrating animals as if there's a story, right? I think, for instance, this, if there is a narrative to this mural of the hair on top of the tortoise, what is it?
You know, so that area was down in like an industrial area. Kansas City is split by both the Kansas and the Missouri state line, and we were over on the Kansas side in this industrial area near all these trains and stuff. And those alligator like snapping turtles are pretty nasty creatures, and you would see them around the rivers and stuff. So like we were talking about this earlier, when I moved from the East Coast and then ended up in the Midwest, it kind of dawned on me quickly that like I had been accidentally like indoctrinated with having to figure out, like I was constantly trying to emulate what New York was or what Boston was, because I admired that, and I found myself drawing b-boys or a subway train and stuff. But now I'm living in this area that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and I don't have any of those references, and that's probably not what I should be trying to emulate. So I started looking around me. You know, at this time, the Art Institute that I went to had found out that I was interested in graffiti and doing it, and they had turned me into the police, and I'd gone to jail and been kicked out of school. And so I was kind of depressed for a while because I was sad that a place that was supposed to be creative and supportive and actually not really in my business that way, it, you know, stepped over that line. And so I started searching for like, what was it that originally made me happy about doing art? And when I lived in different parts of the world, my parents would always take me to these like crazy zoos, drive-through zoos overseas, or natural history museums. And every time I came home, I found myself drawing animals. So I went back to what made me happy and combined that with the other thing that was making me happy, and that was, doing graffiti.
So two things I want to touch on is this arrest, and on what grounds did the school have to turn you in?
At the time it was, 93 in Kansas City, and graffiti was new to the city and it was starting to grow. And so the community was getting concerned enough that they put out rewards. The school at the time was old school enough that they still had a switchboard where the students would have to like call in and hit a switchboard in order to call out. And that was how I found out who and how many people turned me into the police.
Wow, so you're saying how many people? So it wasn't just one person?
No, it was staff members and some students, and knew the switchboard operator, and she told me what was going on. And, I kind of danced the line, and really people at school shouldn't have known what I was doing. Maybe I thought I was in a safe space. And also rumors, and stuff just get around. So, I made the classic mistake of making myself too well known.
Well, in hindsight, was that a blessing or was that a mistake for you?
I think it depends on the day that you asked me. I've had days where I've thought, back to my 18-year-old self and said, why would I have bothered putting myself out there and go ahead and live the two separate lives? On the other hand, it made the news for about a week straight. I was on probation for 3.5 years, fought it for 9 months in court. It was long and messy. But
you said there was some upside to this.
Well, and the upside was that it made the news enough that that's actually what jump started my career. So once it made the news, a business owner reached out to my probation officer, somehow found me, and my first job started paying off some of my fines. And so that's where things kind of just took a left-hand turn, so to speak. And I started getting jobs and stuff off of that. And
if you don't mind me asking, how high were the fines?
At the time it was 93. It was about $3,500. I can't remember how much the court costs were. And then I had about 3.5 years of probation.
Wow, that's a heavy burden for a kid, isn't it?
18 years old, yeah, it was pretty scary, and when I didn't get a chance to go back to school, I felt like I disappointed my parents, but, I love the art form, and, and I danced with it. So that's,
yeah,
that's what I get. So, and, now that I look back, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but now that I look back on it, I really appreciate the education that I've received through my crewmates, through East and Gear and Emit. And, I got crewmates like Ewok in New York, Dalek, and a whole bunch of
all
those.
very talented.
Yeah, Dalek, all of them are all really talented group. And that education, I think, actually saved me from a possible humdrum kind of art life where I may have made it as an illustrator, but I may have kind of sunk into the background a little bit more. So being around that this culture and all of that stuff had such an impact on my work that I think it pushed me in the direction that I really needed to go.
Right, because you start doing commercial projects like this installation. Was this a private residence, or was with this mural of the dog and the roses?
Oh, that was in a club called the 10 Spot. That's actually my dog Fudge, my French bulldog. And then I painted the 1 and the 0 over his eyes, and then I made that 3-dimensional blinged out 10 that hangs around his neck. But Yeah, no, that was like a sitting area before you went into the main part of the club.
So I gather there's this kind of aha moment for you that you decide, look, you know what? Um, Instead of trying to be an outsider so hard, you know, perhaps I try to integrate with my art into in the public space, in the commercial space. Um, were you intent on finding commercial success for your work, or you just
Really,
was?
I was intent on surviving and doing art. And you know, truth be told, Kansas City really pushed back for the first 10 or 15 years from me working on public stuff. It wasn't supported so much, but I think I was really determined to, I hate to use the word normalize it, but to integrate it into the landscape of the Kansas City area
Yeah,
along with my friends. And basically by being consistent and constantly doing and being really prolific. I mean, we painted and painted and painted, and just we really didn't give them a choice, whether they liked it or not. And you know, thank God for like some of the like festivals that were happening. We were laughing on the phone earlier about how I remember Kansas City's major turnover to supporting this type of artwork publicly really came after a lot of the stuff happened in Miami, you know, with the Art Basel and Wynwood, because then people started asking me, like, have you ever heard of it? And I said, yeah, I've been lucky enough to go paint there a couple times. And it was interesting. And this is kind of a Kansas City, maybe some Midwest mentality, but like once it's become accepted somewhere else, then that triggers the acceptance
exactly.
here. And so what I was lucky enough to like be able to ride that wave, and it's kind of grown into its own monster. There's a lot of you know, public art around there, but there's also a lot of stuff that kind of blurs the lines and calls itself street art and graffiti, which has been kind of hard to watch, but I think it's just the nature of the beast.
So, and you say it's hard to watch. I'm always curious and probing that a little bit with writers and quote unquote muralists. I generally certain muralists I don't like calling street artists out of respect because of the craft. Um, where is it that the line blurs for you between the two?
I think the intentionality on how someone is selling it. And so, you know, when there's, I think when it's sort of a natural progression that somebody, this is just my opinion, that somebody that happened to do graffiti at some point in their career and it morphs into one thing and changes over time, then it just becomes like this natural progression, and it's not like part of necessarily a marketing campaign to sell themselves a certain way. It's a natural progression. I think what I think I can speak for some people when there's an intentionality of like picking up, I guess, spray paint and going straight to painting murals, and let's say like hashtagging it as graffiti or things like that, with the intention of luring in people that want to purchase a small piece of rebellion when they don't know anything about the history or they don't know anything about you know, the culture of it, but they know that other people are attracted to it and they sell it that way. I think that that's when you find some.
Oh, I lost you there. Hopefully you'll come back. Let me try to get you back. 1 second. And try to get you back. Bear with me, folks, as I try to get Scribes back. Uh, just connection issue.
There we go.
I'm sorry, we got disconnected.
Yeah, it may have been me. I'm sorry. I'm not sure where I left off, but and
But
where I got cut
can I
off.
pick up on one of your points you say about purchased rebellion?
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting concept about this culture, right? About, you know, how someone can actually manipulate their way into infamy without putting in the work, right?
Hmm.
And uniquely about, I have to say this, uniquely amongst uh, graffiti writers, style writers who can cross the tracks and do actual murals like the one we see here, the Black Wall Street mural, become part of the moment and purposeful. Muralists don't get into typography. They're not, you know, style writers, typographers, and that's a very unique characteristic of someone like yourself. This particular mural, I want to know more about, and was this before the Black Lives Movement, or was this uh, uh, during the Black Lives Movement?
No, this was before. So my family is originally from Tulsa, and Tulsa experienced this has actually been on, this mural in particular has been on all over the national news lately. They had, one of the country's worst race riots there.
Yeah.
And next year will mark the 100th anniversary of it. And so there's a graffiti writer that lives there named Skur, who's him and his brother probably Tulsa's like earliest writers, and he was hooked in with the Greenwood Cultural Center, and they asked me to come out and do this mural, and they handpicked the subject matter that they wanted to see in different letters. So I got a chance to draw it in my style, but they definitely had an idea of the kind of story that the community wanted to tell. So it was known as the Green Apple for some time, and it was the probably the wealthiest African American small town in the entire country, and the first person to have all indoor electricity and plumbing was an African American doctor that lived in that Greenwood area too. But they got into an argument over, whether someone touched a white woman, and one thing led to another, and unfortunately, like, the white Americans of that area were handing out guns and torches at the VFW after the World War, and they headed into that town or that part of town and burnt it to the ground.
Yeah, an important part of history. And a question for you: how are things in Kansas City over the last several weeks? With
Kansas City has its own, brand and flavor of it. Living around the world, I've seen all kinds of interesting ways that communities, interact with each other. And Kansas City has a divide, and it has a history that needs to be worked on and revised. And like a lot of cities, has a lot of work to do to fix relationships and stuff between people. But I've seen different brands of communities pick on each other. When I was in Boston, I saw Irish people pick on the African Americans, and then like African Americans really go hard on the Caribbean blacks that were coming in from like Cuba and Barbados. And so there was this interesting racism going on in between colors there. So when I moved to Kansas City, it was like classic old school white, and black. And when I lived in San Francisco, there was a time where I remember whites and African Americans and Hispanics all ganging up on Asian Americans.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to be able to move around the world and see how a lot of us are the same and how the problems are similar, but they're just kind of different shades of gray.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Given Kansas City's history, you know, with jazz, food, with barbecue, and especially with jazz and baseball. I mean,
Mhm.
it's got a rich legacy, doesn't it? In the African American diaspora.
It really does, and and that's really celebrated here. You know, we have the Negro League Museum here, which is a
Yeah.
beautiful museum, like dedicated to that whole part of history. We had our own brand of jazz, and you know, like lots of cities across America, like we will all claim that our barbecue is the best. You know, and so we have our own style of barbecue, and that's you know, and you know, like supposedly burn-in barbecue was something that was you know, invented here in Kansas City. So you know, it doesn't make sense to me a lot of times that there's so much to celebrate that comes from that community, or I should say within our community. It's not that community in our community. It's there's so much to be celebrated from people of color and white alike within Kansas City, and the fact that there's any kind of divide at any time is just, it's confusing.
Yeah, it's a shame. But you know, you're a community-minded person, you and your wife. And I want to switch gears towards this project. Is this part of the Mercy Hospital projects?
No,
This
so
installation?
I'll rewind. No, it's not. This is actually for the Center for the Visually Impaired, and that one was really difficult. So to rewind really quick, like I've always been interested in doing art for kids even before I was doing graffiti. So I think has made its way into graffiti work. And I've got a real passion for doing things for kids. This particular project that's up on the screen sprang up from the work that I did with Children's Mercy. But what made this one even harder was this was a tactile mural created for kids
Yeah.
with different levels of sight. And so it became a really scary thing to be one. I'm lucky that I'm known in Kansas City for the work that I do, but for a bunch of people who don't see my work, you know, it doesn't matter. And so that was, I mean, that was kind of humbling because I couldn't ride off of who I was when I walked in the door, maybe with the people that hired me, but definitely not with the kids. And my wife, like you said earlier, you know, is a fabric artist and textile artist. So we combined our two kind of styles together, but you notice it doesn't look a whole lot like my cartoon work because they put all these different kinds of goggles. Like if you look at the photo that you've got up right now, the eyes are kind of spread apart. Even the beak has a certain amount of distance between the eyes, and reds and blues and yellows. There are different spectrums of how people lose their sight. And so for some people, there are colors that stand out to them. So that drove the entire color scheme. For some people, they just constantly see blurry. So what does an owl look like? It's an animal that survives in the dark. It thrives in the dark better than anybody, better than most animals. So we wanted to make the owl the hero of the story. And it's this owl that's sending owls out into the dark to learn how to work and survive. But the eyes spread apart, and the different parts of it still allow the kids with blurry vision to be able to make out where the eyes and the beak are. So I had to stretch my style out and away from each other, and just approach it differently so that several different types of sight could experience it in different ways. And for some, it was all tactile. So all of those feathers on there are separate pieces that my wife made, and the kids can literally run their fingers you know, through all the feathers. And the first time I saw those kids come down the hall, and they're used to doing the same thing every day and feeling the same things, and all of a sudden they felt the mural and they stopped and they started experiencing it, just totally brought me to tears.
What a beautiful story. There's a great satisfaction, and I would imagine, in this work that you do to bring joy and color to these young children's lives.
It was kind of an accidental mission that I fell into. I went to school hoping to do like children's books and you know, animation for kids, and then found my way into doing graffiti, which is what taught me how to like look at space in a different way and look at like large walls and stuff. And like what you're looking at on the screen right now is the vending room of Children's Mercy Hospital, where I was the art director there for about 18 years, or resident artist, as you call it. And I designed the floors as part of the wayfinding, because a lot of people have anxiety when they're in the hospital. And so the train tracks like send you in different directions. There's interactive buttons where the kids push a button and the train goes around the top of the room. Myself and the carpenters made all of those tabletops, and there's characters and games that are embedded inside of the tables. And so my goal was really to, a lot of these kids that end up coming there too don't have a lot of money and live in rough situations.
Wait
so
a minute.
My job was to make their experience something that was out of the ordinary at a time that they were dealing with something that was out of the ordinary.
If you could hear me, I was going to say, well, they don't have a lot of money, but I just a very lighthearted joke. They come in on a G4 plane
yes.
that you painted. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the goal for that, like they fly the kids around for free to find different specialists. Like I know that plane was flown to Boston to help one of the kids get to a specialist out there. Those planes are not used for the CEOs or anything like that. The inside of the plane has hospital beds with like all of the medical gas type things hooked up in there. And really, like the kids are lucid and awake when they can go on this trip, or they're brought in. But you imagine a kid feeling that much anxiety, and then they go to get in this plane, and it's like jumping inside of a giant Hot Wheels plane. And the first message they get is like, we're specifically here for you. But you can see like some of the, I mean, in the helicopter and stuff that I did, I did 2 helicopters and 2 airplanes.
Someone wants me to enlarge. Why don't we? I just want to enlarge this image so that folks can see the mural or the artwork that you painted on it.
And that stuff's weird because you have to paint it with a special kind of aircraft paint, because airplanes and helicopters change shape when they go up into the atmosphere.
Right.
And so they you have to use a special brand of paint. But you know, in some of the design work and stuff that you can see, like going like through the background and stuff, like those are all things that were influenced by being around graffiti lettering. Like there's another helicopter that I don't have a photograph of, but it has bouncing arrows going down the helicopter, and an arrow on the bottom of the helicopter with a super bunny flying on the bottom. So when it would fly over the hospital and kids would look out the windows and stuff, they could see the Superman rabbit like flying on the bottom of it too. But all their ambulances, each one has like the same characters but a unique background, and every single background that I put on them in different color schemes were either like the classic old school like broken rocks and bricks and graffiti patterning and stuff. And it was really fun to be able to like kind of push the boundaries of like how that stuff is used and traveled. And in a weird way, it was like another level of getting up, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. Like getting way up, in fact. But what I like is that, again, this one struck me in a way that, you bring contemporary art and make fun, like have a good, you reference contemporary history, this painting.
Mhm.
And was this part of that program to bring this type of work in?
No, that was actually in rural Kansas. And because I was going out to a part of rural Kansas to do live painting, and then they told me that they paid me to come out and do that job. And then they said they wanted to donate it to one of the organizations there. So it went to a no-kill animal shelter. So I was able to incorporate my animals in there, but I was able to do, the American Gothic idea painting
Yeah.
and tie it into like something that a lot of people understood out there. So it's like the delivery was with spray cans. So it was like really bizarre to a lot of people to see that for the first time. But the subject matter was something that they could relate to. And then the afterlife of the painting went to an animal shelter. So it made sense to people on different levels.
I like that.
This,
I'm sorry. I was going to interject and say I'm just so impressed with the commitment you have to giving back to social cause, and
I think that that's something that kind of like grew over time. It's something that was always like put inside of me through my parents. But I think that seeing it in action went by working at the children's hospital in particular, and seeing how it affects people definitely encourages you to want to do more. Because kind of like, I guess, doing graffiti, when you were like going out and like getting up and you'd see it out there and you'd get excited and it would make you want to do more. Giving can be kind of done in the same way. And it's something that, like, once you do it, like if you can kind of stay on that path, it just becomes natural to like want to keep doing that.
one of the things that's interesting about the work is how fantastical it is, right? You create these stories, familiar characters, but again, your painting skills really kind of allow them to, I guess, become otherworldly, like the seal with 4 eyes and a Dookie gold rope chain.
Yeah.
So where, in terms, and then this with hip hop, one of the things I wanted to ask you before was like, what kind of a role, if any, did hip hop play in your coming up?
In Boston, it was very like kind of like stereotypical, like early 90s hip hop that I liked. But it wasn't also until I moved to Kansas City, probably gained a certain level of freedom, where I can maneuver around on my own. And I met a lot of DJs here. I was blessed to be a part of a magazine called Flavor Pack that put out a magazine as often as it could, and through these giant warehouse parties. So, I got to a chance to experience some of the things that some people got to experience with hip hop, like being in an abandoned building and pirating power, like watching people do that, and then getting and partying there until we get busted and they ask you to leave. And so all that stuff was like a heartbeat behind it. And I love it, but it didn't, I wouldn't say that it necessarily motivated me. Like I felt like I needed to do something in order to be part of the four elements, but I was happy to represent anytime somebody asked me to like come out and do something with them. But I kind of felt like I floated in and out on whether I was that part of that whole like global phenomenon of all those elements together, if that makes sense.
It does. This illustration I'm looking at, it strikes me as something that would be out of a children's book.
Yeah, that's in Children's Mercy Hospital, and it's also been reprinted, and I got a chance to install it myself in a hospital in Mexico City called Federico Gomez. And so the idea behind it is that the kids are making these piñatas because I was going to Mexico and they wanted me to do something that celebrated their heritage, but you know, like, for lack of better words, like it can be hard sometimes to be, you know, the white guy that's trying to figure out how to honor a community and not have it accidentally come across like a stereotype. So to try not to do any of that stuff, I really meditated on the fact that piñatas, for the most part, are always part of some kind of positive celebration in somebody's life. And so the hospital was partnering with this hospital over in Mexico and working with them on radiology and heart stuff. But if you look on the right-hand side, there's one of the piñatas is busting open, and it's got a bunch of hearts coming out of it. And that's actually the state of Missouri, where Children's Mercy Hospital is, and it's breaking open. And all those hearts represented all the employees of Children's Mercy together giving this gift. But it's really the kids that make the whole thing special. So that whole city skyline in the background is actually Mexico City. And when I reinstalled this mural to celebrate our relationship with them and to celebrate our like Mexican American community in Children's Mercy, I then blended Kansas City into the skyline of Mexico City to kind of show that collaboration and marriage between the two.
Oh,
That's even the Missouri bluebird that's up there is our state bird. So there's these small hints towards you know, Missouri and Kansas City, but most of it is really about the kids.
Speaking of the kids, this next mural is a lot of fun. Is this a commercial project, a commercial mural?
That's actually that's one of the waiting rooms in Children's Mercy, and that's only the proof that I sent to them. So that would be one wall that the kids are sitting in front of. And then myself and some carpenters built a 3-dimensional wave that went up onto the ceiling. And on the other side of the waiting room was the beach with a whole bunch of other characters cheering them on like they're watching a surf competition. So when you sit in the waiting room, you feel like you're sitting in the ocean and all of them are getting ready to come crashing over you.
It's phenomenal how much you're able to, especially here, you know, the worlds you create around these animals and give them life, give them dignity and also humor. You make them acceptable.
This one in particular, I got to give a shout out to my friends in South Dakota. There's a graffiti jam that happens every year called Red Can, and it's on the Cheyenne River in South Dakota. It's probably like one of the poorest counties in the entire country, and it's on a reservation. And a group of us go in. My mentor East goes in, and he was the one that brought me in. And this lady, Julie, runs the whole program out there, and we'll bring in artists from different parts of the country to illustrate the different like Sioux and Lakota legends. So this is actually, they call the United States Turtle Island, and that's what I'm illustrating there. This is only actually a small portion of the wall. That wall probably is double the length. And so there's also some other animals that were part of their creation story. And then on the far right, you have to forgive me, I forgot exactly what it says, but in Lakota, basically it says, water is life. That I did some lettering with a guy named Serval from Switzerland. And that was at the time that everybody was protesting the oil stuff that was going through the rivers up that direction, through the Missouri River.
And also what people should know about you is also that you practice you have a proper studio practice, right? You paint on canvases and you exhibit,
Hmm.
and again extending the unique characters that you've developed over the years. Tell me about this part of your life of bringing this work to galleries. Is that a
Um,
satisfying format for you?
it really is. It's I think it's different. It's tangible and something that I can take with me. I love doing murals and walls and stuff like that because it's something that I can walk away from and people can enjoy on one level. I think this one like that kind of stuff. I like that people can, um, like be able to take that stuff home. And a lot of the stuff that I do that's like this is actually telling the extension of the story with the rhino Rumpus and this world that I've started to create around him. That's Rumpus right
Right.
behind me. And so
Right.
I
I'm
have
going to skip.
this.
I want to know more about Rumpus, so I'm going to skip up to him.
Okay.
So let's talk about Rumpus because you've made him a character, a toy, but he's been a figure in your imagination and in your murals for some time.
He's probably been around since about 94 or so. When I got kicked out of school, like I said earlier, like I was trying to figure out like what it was that brought me joy. And I started looking at drawing animals again, and I came across a rhino. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", big, heavy dude. I spend a lot of time alone in isolation doing my work. And rhinos can't see very far, and they do interesting things like they try to stomp out fires and protect people and stuff. And so I just ended up feeling this like kinship towards this animal, and I started drawing him as this type of art therapy because I really thought that my life had gone a really bad and negative direction, and it was really rough. But I think that drawing this rhino character is one of the things that helped me tell my story or be able to express my feelings. So I think I was doing art therapy and I didn't really know I was doing it. I was self-medicating myself by drawing this rhino character. And then I started drawing the bees in all of the murals because originally the bees were like considered peer pressure in all of the murals, and they were always trying to get the rhino to become part of the hive and work a normal job and do your assigned lot in life. But I've kind of changed that since then. I just use them as like secondary characters throughout the murals and people, and not everybody or anything is trying to peer pressure you in some
Yeah.
way. So
So
I
the
usually.
animals run throughout your work and as well as your wife's work,
Mhm.
which we mentioned her earlier, and she does the plush dolls. So both of you have a shared commitment and love for animals, I gather.
Mhm. Yeah, we've got 4 dogs and like and too many pets and kids and all that stuff. But I think that like by living together, we just sort of ended up influencing each other. She had a real passion for doing soft sculpture stuff, but the Art Institute didn't really understand that very well, and she actually gave up art for about 10 years. And it was my interest in designing toys when I had some friends at Cardboard Spaceship in Santa Cruz reach out and asked me to do a show where all I did was paint those toys that you had shown earlier. And I was like, well, that sounds like a lot of fun, but who in the world's going to buy this stuff? Like, how much can you sell a hand painted toy for? And boy, was I wrong. That was some of the most coolest and responsible and dedicated collector base that I've ever met.
Hmm.
And then through that, by learning about these galleries that were doing all of this custom toy stuff, I found out that there were people doing plush shows. And so I reintroduced this to my wife and said, listen, you know, like, you may have been given a hard time about doing this in school, but I think that you unfortunately were just ahead of the time, and maybe this would be your chance to do it again. So by this point, you know, she had been dealing with my stupid cartoon characters for so long that I think it was natural for her to start doing some of the animal stuff too, because our whole house is surrounded by that stuff. And she does it really well. I mean, her
That's
level
awesome.
of detail and sewing detail is amazing.
Yeah, one can tell. Again, you've got this tremendous journey, and you still remain true to the letter. One of the things that I appreciate is this balance that you have between the commitment to letter form and the characters, and how you integrate them. How committed you are to both of these loves that you have.
I think that, like, admittedly, like, I strayed away from it for a long time when I was working at Children's Mercy. And, you know, I mainly focused on that, and it was for the right cause. It was a total worthy cause to be doing that. But in order to find balance in my life and to I every time I go out and do something like that, I feel like I'm saying thank you back to the people that influenced and educated me,
Mm-hmm.
but doing it in my own way. So when I'm out there on a wall, you know, I'm thinking about East, I'm thinking about Emit and Sub and Ewok and all of those guys. But I felt like I finally started getting to be more comfortable to, like, go back to the letter form, and do that stuff. And they started cheering me on and saying, like, you need to be doing more of it. And I guess I was never brave enough to push that part of my career. I would stay in my lane. A lot of times I would say, like, oh, I'm the perfect cheerleader for you guys. You guys are like the jocks, and you do the big dope letters, and I'll come in and cheerlead next to you, and I'll pretty it up. But they all were so supportive. And now, like, when I
Yeah,
go out and do lettering again, it's a way for me to unplug. And almost all of them are all freestyle. I don't draw a sketch and go to a wall anymore. I just go up and start painting the S and start working down the wall.
amazing, amazing talent. And you know what I want people to be aware of, that you're looking at on the screen, while it may seem like you're looking at cartoon characters. It actually spells out scribe. It's so genius, how you've managed to arrive at this place, and I hope you really continue on this trajectory.
I'm hoping so too. I find a lot of joy in it.
Scribe, so we have about a minute before Instagram shuts us off. I want to thank you so much for sharing your work with us here at the Museum of Graffiti and our visitors to the Artist Talks. What an amazing way to represent Kansas City with this amount of talent that you have, and your wife. So if you have any parting words to our visitors, the floor is yours.
I think all I can say is I can't believe that you guys reached out to me. I'm so beyond honored. I look up to the history and how it's gone back, and I try my best to honor that in my own way, and stay on my own path. And the fact that you guys reached out to me is a bucket list item for me. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you listening to me talk about all my teachers and stuff too. And I hope that all my teachers at some point get a chance to talk with you guys too. Keep up the good work there with the museum. It's a beautiful thing to see come to fruition. And I just pray that you guys, like, continue to grow and be able to do whatever it is that you want to do in your dreams.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And of course, we grow as the community grows, and as people like yourselves contribute also advance and innovate new creative ideas, but also give back to the community. I think you're a great example of what's best about this art form. I know there's this stereotype that's associated with kids who write and get up. But it's important that, you know, their talents are harnessed, right? Because you're living proof of what happens if it's harnessed.
Yes.
And so,
You never know what it can
that,
be, so
you know,
you
important
can't
to share.
you can't judge anything.
No, exactly. And you're having an impact on the communities, not just the creative communities, people in need, children in need. So you are a valued and essential person in our world. You're an artist, and we have to celebrate you and your talents. So we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Okay, thank you so much, Scribe. Take good care, and I'll be back on Thursday with Keo Rock
all of you guys
from
have
New York. Thank you. Okay.